I love you. Those words were followed by one shot, and Miss Young died right there on her bedroom floor from a shot in the back.
Hey, just take a deep breath real quick. When are you going to realize that everything you're saying is just silly? And it can't be substantiated, it can't be verified, and you're not being honest about a damn thing. You are not being honest about anything.
The
only honesty that we've said in here,
the
only honesty that we've said in here is don't do this.
No,
I love you.
No, but
don't do this.
No, but
you
listen,
don't have to do this.
I don't know what you're
Daddy
talking about.
hurt mommy.
The humid, heavy Florida heat of late July hung over North Jacksonville like a damp towel. It was around 1:30 in the morning on July 23, 2022. Outside an apartment complex on Biscayne Boulevard, everything seemed calm on the surface. Crickets buzzed in the grass, the distant hum of highway traffic rolled through the warm night air. But inside apartment 12450, a quiet nightmare was taking place behind closed doors. A downstairs neighbor sat up in bed, suddenly startled awake. Heavy footsteps pounded overhead. Someone was stomping across the floor above. It was violent, deliberate, and fast. Then, through the thin ceiling, came a woman's trembling voice. It was desperate. It was full of panic. She cried out 5 words that would later haunt an entire city. "Please don't. I love you." A second later, a sharp, deafening blasts shattered the stillness. Then came a chilling silence. The heavy footsteps quickly retreated down the stairs. The sound of a door slamming shut echoed into the night, followed by the muffled cries of 2 tiny children. A 1-year-old and a 3-year-old were left alone in the dark room, sobbing beside an unresponsive form on the floor. The neighbor reached for her phone and dialed 911. Her voice shook as she told the dispatcher what she heard. Within minutes, police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, blue lights flashing against the apartment buildings. Officers walked up the stairs, stood outside apartment 12450, and knocked on the door. They listened closely. Beyond the wood, they could hear small, distressed sounds, children crying softly inside. They pounded on the door. They announced themselves, but no adult came to answer. Under current regulations, without clear sight of a crime or a visual confirmation of immediate life-threatening danger through a window, the officers did not break down the heavy door. They checked the perimeter, found no signs of forced entry on the outside, and eventually left the scene, leaving the quiet apartment locked tightly from the inside. Hours passed. The sun rose over Jacksonville, burning off the morning haze. The children remained inside that silent apartment, terrified and alone, right beside their mother's body. In their sweet, innocent attempt to keep their mother warm while trapped in that room, the tiny toddlers pulled heavy blankets over her motionless body. Today, we are visiting the case of Tasheka Young, known to thousands of loving listeners across Jacksonville as Tashika. Tashika was a bright, charismatic 34-year-old radio personality for Power 106.1, a local voice whose warm energy filled the airwaves and brought joy to thousands every single morning. She was a dedicated mother, a loving daughter, and a beloved community figure. But behind her radiant smile and success, Tashika was quietly navigating a complex, dangerous relationship that was slowly closing in on her. Before we walk through the step-by-step investigation of this tragic case, take a short second to subscribe if you're just joining us and turn on notifications. By subscribing today, you help us bring truth, honor, and justice to victims whose stories deserve to be heard, ensuring these important cases are never forgotten. Join our community now so you never miss a step in our journey for justice. As the morning of July 23rd turned into the afternoon, Tashika's mother, Olivia Young, began to feel a knot in her stomach. Olivia spoke to her daughter every single day without fail. They were best friends. When morning turned to afternoon and Tashika failed to answer her phone, Olivia's maternal instincts kicked in. Something was horribly wrong. Calls went straight to voicemail, text messages remained unread. The silence was deafening. Then came a phone call that sent a chill down Olivia's spine. The call was from Bursey Armstrong Jr., the 35-year-old father of Tashika's 2 young children. Bursey claimed he was also trying to reach Tashika and could not get a hold of her. He sounded calm, perhaps a little concerned, but his call only heightened Olivia's anxiety. Driven by an overwhelming urge to check on her daughter, Olivia drove straight to the Biscayne Boulevard apartment complex. When she arrived outside apartment 12450, the parking lot was quiet. She walked up the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled out her spare key, turned the handle, pushed open the door, and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The apartment smelled faint and strange. The living room was quiet, but as Olivia walked further down the hallway toward the master bedroom, her world shattered into a million pieces. Lying on the bedroom floor beneath a heavy blanket was Tashika. She was completely unresponsive, surrounded by blood from 2 gunshot wounds. Standing near her body, huddled together in confusion and terror, were her 2 little children, her 3-year-old son and 1-year-old daughter. They had been trapped in that room with their mother's body for over 12 hours. Olivia rushed forward, screaming out for her daughter, trying desperately to find a pulse, but Tashika was already cold to the touch. In that horrific moment of grief and horror, Olivia scooped her 2 precious grandchildren into her arms and ran out of the apartment to call 911. When the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office detectives arrived, the scene transformed into an active, high-priority homicide investigation. Yellow police tape quickly closed off the stairwell. Forensic investigators in white suits stepped carefully around the bedroom, taking photos, gathering casing evidence, and measuring trajectory angles. Detectives soon uncovered another heartbreaking layer to this tragedy. Tashika was 4 months pregnant with a baby girl at the time of her death. Detectives needed to figure out who could have done this. Who had the motive, the access, and the cruelty to murder a pregnant mother in front of her young children? As officers comforted the hysterical family outside, the 3-year-old boy looked up at his grandmother and the responding officers. With innocence and trauma mixed in his small voice, he said 4 words that instantly shifted the entire direction of the homicide investigation. Daddy hurt mommy. The father of those children was Bursey Armstrong Jr., and as detectives began running his name through their databases, a dark history of volatile behavior, jealousy, and hidden threats began to emerge from the shadows. But proving a crime in a court of law requires far more than the words of a traumatized child. Detectives needed physical evidence, a murder weapon, cell phone records, and a timeline that could hold up in front of a jury. Suddenly, as investigators were still marking evidence tags inside the apartment, a car pulled up to the outer perimeter of the crime scene. A man stepped out of the vehicle and began walking toward the police tape. It was Bursey Armstrong Jr. himself. Bursey Armstrong Jr. walked toward the yellow crime tape with a quiet, calm look on his face. He acted like an innocent father who just happened to drop by after hearing something bad might have happened. He looked detectives in the eye and said he only wanted to check on his family. Detectives watched him closely. In any murder investigation, the last person to see the victim alive, or the partner with a rocky history, is always a key focus. They asked Bursey if he would willingly come down to the police station to answer a few quick questions. He agreed right away. He seemed cooperative. He acted like he had nothing at all to hide. Inside the small interview room at the Police Memorial Building in downtown Jacksonville, the air was cold. Bright overhead lights reflected off the dark linoleum floor. A single camera mounted high in the corner recorded every movement, every breath, and every quiet blink. Bursey sat at the metal table, resting his hands in front of him. He told the detectives a very clean, simple story. He said he hadn't been anywhere near Tashika's apartment in over a week. He claimed he had been staying 45 minutes away at his parents' house. He said he spent his evening relaxing, running normal errands, and going to sleep early, He looked directly at the officers and insisted he still loved Tashika. He swore he would never hurt the mother of his kids. Detectives listened calmly, nodding along. But while Bursey was talking, team members down the hall were already digging deep into his past. They were pulling up old police records, phone logs, and domestic dispute reports from Duval County. And the picture starting to form on their computer screens looked nothing like the calm, caring man sitting in that interview room. The official records revealed a long, dark pattern of toxic behavior between Bursey and Tashika. This was not a sudden burst of anger out of nowhere. It was a slow, dangerous buildup that had been boiling under the surface for years. In May of 2021, about a year before the tragic shooting, police were called after a scary domestic incident where Bursey claimed Tashika threatened him with a knife. But when officers arrived, Tashika showed them visible marks and scratches across her neck. She told them Bursey had jumped her while she was asleep and choked her right in front of their young son. Detectives asked Bursey for permission to search his cell phone, and he signed a consent form. But digital forensic experts were already extracting data from both phones, uncovering a chilling text exchange sent in the days leading up to the killing. Tashika had texted him, "Hopefully time apart will bring us closer, whatever God has for us." Bursey replied, "We'll see what happens." Minutes later, Bursey asked, "How would it make you feel if you never saw me again?" and sent her a link to an album titled Dead to Me. Then came Bursey's damning threat. "You've been a dead woman. You'll never be alive." Tashika pleaded with him, standing up for herself and her unborn baby girl. "You're supposed to protect me, not hurt me. I have our third child growing inside of me, and you treat me like crap." Bursey dismissed her coldly. "You're not that important. You have 2 kids. Grow up." Furthermore, when detectives examined the text message history on their phones, they confronted Bursey with a critical piece of digital evidence: a text message Tashika had sent him 2 weeks before her death, containing a photo of a Glock 43X handgun. When investigators asked him why there was a picture of a lethal firearm sent to his phone if he claimed he didn't have a gun, Bursey's story instantly began to spin out of control as he gave 4 completely different explanations. First, he claimed that the weapon shown in the photo wasn't real at all, telling detectives it was just a BB gun. When detectives pressed him further, he changed his story, admitting the Glock was real, but swearing it had been stolen from him months earlier back in January. A few moments later, he revised his account a 3rd time, claiming he had actually found the handgun and taken it back from Tashika right before her death. Finally, Bursey offered a 4th explanation, bringing up a name investigators had never heard: a local guy from the neighborhood he called Scotty. Bursey claimed Scotty had borrowed the Glock for $100, then drove all the way out to Middleburg on the very day of the murder to return it to him. Detectives checked Bursey's phone records from top to bottom. There was 0 record, call log, or message history with anyone named Scotty. Even worse, detectives found heartbreaking text messages sent just 2 weeks before the murder. Tashika had texted her own mother in secret, telling her a terrifying detail. Bursey had pulled his Glock handgun out and held it straight to her head during a heated argument. The relationship was filled with deep jealousy, control, and constant fear. Tashika had been trying to build a clean, stable life for her children as a successful radio presenter. But every time she tried to pull away from Bursey, he pulled her back into the storm. Then came the phone records. Phone records showed his mobile device connecting to the exact tower serving Tashika's apartment complex right around 1:20 in the morning, the precise moment the downstairs neighbor heard someone burst through the bedroom door. Detectives also discovered that immediately after shooting Tashika, Bursey took her cell phone and threw it out on the side of the road to destroy digital evidence before driving away. Detectives stepped out of the room, leaving Bursey alone under the glow of the fluorescent lights. Left by himself, the calm, relaxed act started to crumble fast. Bursey began pacing around the small room. He looked up at the wall. He stared at the air vents in the drop ceiling. He was realizing that the police were not buying his story. Then he made a sudden, desperate move that was caught entirely on camera. Inside the small interrogation room, Bursey looked up toward the upper wall, adjusting his shirt before turning his eyes directly toward the camera mounted high in the room. He walked right up to the camera lens, leaned in, and stared straight into it. He wiped something off his face, gave a subtle wave or gesture directly toward the lens, and then backed away. He walked over to the corner of the room, picked up a pink chair, and placed it right on top of the long interrogation table. Without hesitation, Bursey climbed up onto the table, stepped onto the chair, and reached his hands into the ceiling, attempting to push open the ceiling tiles to climb into the crawl space above. However, as he tried to haul himself up, the chair and table shifted beneath him. Realizing he couldn't get through, he quickly scrambled back down off the table, rushed to grab the chair, and set it back on the floor, just as the door clicked open. Detectives immediately walked into the room, caught him right after the failed attempt, and restrained him. They forced his arms behind his back and snapped cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. The attempt to escape was a massive turning point for the case. To investigators, it showed a clear consciousness of guilt. An innocent man does not try to crawl through a ceiling to escape a routine interview. While Bursey was being secured, a team of forensic officers was executing a search warrant at his parents' house, the place where he claimed he had spent the entire night sleeping peacefully. Detectives walked through the backyard, searching near the back porch steps. The ground looked slightly disturbed, as if the soil had been freshly turned over in the middle of the night. A detective used a shovel to dig into the soft earth beneath the porch. Just a few inches down, his tool hit a hard object wrapped tightly in plastic. Investigators carefully lifted the package out of the dirt and unwrapped it. Inside was a Glock handgun, the exact caliber used in the shooting. Next to the gun were muddy, dark clothes stained with what appeared to be dried blood. Forensic specialists rushed the weapon and clothing directly to the crime lab for emergency testing. Within hours, the results came back from the lab. The blood on the hidden clothes was an exact match for Tasheka Young, and ballistics tests confirmed the buried Glock was the exact firearm that fired the 2 fatal rounds inside apartment 12450. Bursey Jerome Armstrong Jr. was officially charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. 1 count for the brutal death of Tasheka Young and a 2nd count for the death of her unborn child. 2 years passed after that tragic July morning. 2 long years of painful waiting for the Young family. In July of 2024, the murder trial of Florida versus Bursey Jerome Armstrong Jr. finally began in a quiet courtroom in Duval County. The courtroom was filled with tension. On one side sat Tashika's mother, Olivia Young, surrounded by grieving relatives, friends, and loyal radio listeners who still missed Tashika's bright voice every day. On the other side sat the defense team, alongside Bursey Armstrong Jr. He wore a crisp dress suit, sitting quietly at the table, looking calm and totally unbothered by the heavy charges against him. The prosecution stepped up first to deliver their opening statement. The lead prosecutor did not waste a single second with soft words. She painted a vivid, chilling picture of the last moments of Tashika's life inside apartment 12450. She looked directly at the jury and spoke the heartbreaking words that the downstairs neighbor had heard through her ceiling. "I love you." The prosecutor explained that these were not words of affection. They were the desperate pleas of a pregnant young mother looking directly into the barrel of a loaded gun. She told the jury that Bursey was the only person who had the motive, the access, the weapon, and the dark history of jealousy to carry out such an awful crime. When the prosecution finished their strong 25-minute opening statement, everyone turned to look at the defense team, expecting a detailed defense strategy. But the defense attorney stood up, looked at the jury, and delivered a speech that lasted just 45 seconds. The defense simply reminded the jury that the state bore the entire burden of proof. They claimed that if the state could not prove Bursey's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, the jury was legally obligated to acquit him. They offered no alternative story, no rival suspects, and no alibi. They were gambling everything on hoping the state's evidence had a hole. The prosecution's first major witness took the witness stand. It was the downstairs neighbor who lived directly beneath Tashika's bedroom. The courtroom fell dead silent as the neighbor recounted the events of that dark night. She explained how she woke up around 1:20 in the morning to feed her small baby. Suddenly, she heard a loud, violent crash above her head, as if the bedroom door had been kicked completely off its hinges. She described hearing heavy, furious steps crossing the floor above. Then came the sound of items falling, furniture crashing, and a terrified young woman weeping and begging for her life. The neighbor choked back tears as she repeated the victim's final, desperate words to the court. "Please know, I love you. I love you." She testified that right after those desperate words, a loud, sharp bang shook the room above. Then, absolute silence fell over the building. Next, the prosecution called digital forensic detectives to explain the mountain of electronic evidence harvested from the couple's mobile devices. This was where Bursey's careful plan completely dissolved into dust in front of the jury. Detectives reminded the jury of the chilling text message threats, emphasizing Bursey's words, "You've been a dead woman. You'll never be alive." They presented cell tower data mapping Bursey's physical movements on the night of the crime, showing how his phone traveled directly to Tashika's apartment complex at 1:20 a.m. before her personal phone went silent and was tossed on the roadside. The prosecution then called forensic analysts from the crime lab to present the physical evidence found at the crime scene and buried beneath Bursey's parents' back porch steps. Investigators held up the Glock handgun that had been dug up from the soft soil. Ballistics experts testified under oath that microscopic grooves on the test-fired bullets matched the spent casings found right beside Tashika's body in the bedroom. There was zero doubt. This was the exact weapon that took 2 lives. Next came the DNA evidence. Crime lab technicians revealed that the dark, muddy clothes found buried right next to the gun contained human blood. DNA testing confirmed that the dried blood on Bursey's clothing was a direct, perfect match for Tasheka Young. As if the physical evidence, the cell phone tracking, and the buried murder weapon were not enough, the prosecution played the interrogation room video for the jury. The jury watched in total disbelief as the large video screen showed Bursey staring directly into the camera lens, stacking the pink chair on top of the interrogation table, and trying frantically to reach through the drop ceiling tiles to escape the police station. The video provided clear, undeniable proof of a man who knew he was caught and was desperate to run away from justice. When the prosecution rested its case, the defense called no major witnesses of their own. Bursey chose not to take the stand in his own defense, exercising his right to remain silent. His defense team simply argued that the state had not proven beyond every shadow of a doubt that Bursey was the one holding the trigger that night. The jury was sent out to deliberate. The courtroom waited in high tension, expecting hours or even days of intense debate over the evidence. But the jury did not need days. They did not even need 2 hours. After just 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury walked back into the packed courtroom. The judge asked Bursey Armstrong Jr. to stand and face the court. The clerk read the verdict aloud. Guilty of murder in the 2nd degree for the death of Tasheka Young, and guilty of murder in the 2nd degree for the death of her unborn child. Bursey stood there with a blank expression, showing no remorse, no sadness, and no emotion as the guilty verdicts echoed across the room. A month later, in late August of 2024, the court reconvened for the final sentencing hearing. Family members from both sides stood up to deliver emotional victim impact statements. Bursey's cousin spoke briefly, expressing shock at how a man from a good family could end up in such a position. Bursey's mother could not attend due to illness, but she sent a written statement expressing her deep heartbreak for the loss of Tashika and her unborn grandchild, while acknowledging the painful reality of her son's terrible actions. Then Tashika's mother, Olivia Young, stepped up to the podium to speak to the court. Olivia wiped tears from her eyes as she described the unbearable pain of raising Tashika's 2 surviving toddlers. She recounted the heartbreaking detail of stepping into that bedroom and seeing her tiny 1-year-old granddaughter holding her dead mother's blood-soaked hand on the floor. She shared that her husband, Tashika's father, had passed away from sheer heartbreak before the trial even started, unable to carry the immense grief of losing his daughter. As Olivia spoke passionately about her daughter's memory, Bursey suddenly snapped. "Breaking courtroom rules," he shouted out directly from the defense table, interrupting her in front of the judge. "Through the love and grace of God, you are full of it." The judge immediately slammed down her gavel, calling for order in the courtroom and warning Bursey that another outburst would result in his immediate removal. When order was restored, the judge turned her attention directly to Bursey Armstrong Jr. Her voice was firm, cold, and heavy with the weight of justice. The judge declared that Bursey's actions were an abomination before man and God. She emphasized the cruelty of killing a mother and an unborn child right in front of 2 helpless toddlers, leaving those innocent children without a mother and without a father. The judge pronounced the final sentence: 2 consecutive life sentences in state prison with a mandatory minimum life term. Bursey would never see the outside of a prison wall ever again. Today, Bursey Jerome Armstrong Jr. is serving his life sentences inside the Northwest Florida Reception Center Annex in the Florida Panhandle. Tasheka Young was a woman filled with light, passion, and immense love for her family and her community. Her life was tragically cut short, but her story serves as a powerful, urgent reminder of the silent dangers of domestic control and abuse. Tashika's story highlights how domestic tension can quietly intensify behind closed doors before reaching a catastrophic breaking point. It serves as a vital reminder to take early warning signs, behavioral changes, and domestic conflicts seriously, reaching out for intervention before it is too late. The most heartbreaking victims in domestic tragedies are often the children left behind. Protecting vulnerable family members and ensuring support systems exist for children exposed to domestic strife is a critical duty for every community. If you or someone you know is facing domestic violence, please reach out for help immediately. There are national resources, hotlines, and local shelters dedicated to protecting victims before it is too late. Thank you so much for staying tuned and watching all the way to the end of this video. Your support, time, and engagement mean everything to this channel and help us honor the memory of victims every single week. If this story touched you, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. May Tasheka Young and her unborn child rest in eternal peace, and may her 2 young children grow up wrapped in the warmth, safety, and enduring love of her memory. Stay safe, take care of one another, and I'll see you in the next case.